Mr. Edefson said he has, we will, I think, put that aside for tomorrow, because we need to continue with the public hearing, and I do thank you. Are there any immediate questions for the Commissioner, Representative Dornian and Representative Sanderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe just for the work session, the questions I would have, you stated that there was legislation prohibiting the use of EBT cards in businesses where alcohol accounts for more than 50% of sales revenue, etc. So I'd like to know whether that's a federal or state law, and when it was passed, and when it was.
That was a federal law.
Federal law.
The state also passed legislation to get into compliance, and we'll get you all of the dates about not only when we adopted, what the federal government adopted, when we adopted, and then our recent rule promulgation.
And then I'd like to know, you said there were 2,600 transactions made on the state. If you could tell me the number of people, that would be helpful. Then the average time people are on TANF, and what percentage of the TANF families are two-parent families?
Absolutely, happy to.
Thank you, Representative Sanderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Everybody on the committee just received an email here shortly from Mr. Steve Robinson from the main wire containing a link to data containing 3 years' worth of TANF transactions provided by the Department of Health and Human Services. Commissioner, those are actual transactions on main EBT TANF cards who are supposed to be used by people who live in the state, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Following up on Representative Dorney's question, I mean, again, I find the data, the raw data, interesting. And I guess for tomorrow, I'd like to understand what the department's doing with that data in terms of evaluating what it really demonstrates. I mean, I've heard people say, you know, that data proves that there's a lot of abuse in the system, and I've heard people say, you know, that data proves that there's, you know, very little abuse in the system. Frankly, I don't think that data proves anything one way or the other, you know, until we get some more information about those transactions. I mean, my understanding is that that our state prohibition about where cards could be used took effect in the middle of when that data was being collected. So I'd like to try to understand what the department is doing to evaluate what the impact is of the law that went into effect, I think it was sometime in the middle of 2013, about where the cards could be used. And I'd like to understand what the department's doing with respect to evaluating more information about the use of the cards out of state. Because frankly, from my perspective, you know, in a state like Maine, someone using a card, even over the course, even with some frequency, depending on where they live in southern Maine along the New Hampshire border, even across the border into Massachusetts, isn't as much of a concern to me as looking at, you know, where it might be being used consistently farther afield. So I would love to understand, before we talk about giving the department additional tools, what it's actually doing to evaluate the, you know, using the laws and the tools that are currently in place.
Well, Representative Gattine, we're happy to do that. I think part of what has been expressed here, though, is a desire to continue to embrace the importance of strengthening the integrity of the program to ensure that these limited resources are targeted to those who are eligible and those who are residents of the state. We can certainly document for you the kind of data analysis we're doing, how that is leading to review of cases to determine whether or not someone, in fact, is not a resident of this state but is still receiving these benefits. That is the purpose of this information, and certainly, again, we're trying to make sure that these scarce resources are being used as effectively as possible to not only support direct benefits, but the very vocational assessment that we described earlier is the result of a contract with that was put out to bid with Maine Medical Center Voc Rehab. There are certainly resources that we want to make sure are supporting some of the infrastructure development to support people with the various resources that we believe will help them on a successful pathway.
Sure, but again, I'm looking, again, with respect primarily to the information about cards being used in places where they're not supposed to be used. And until this legislature takes action, there hasn't been a determination that someone that lives in a border town in Maine who wants to do their grocery shopping, in Rochester, New Hampshire, who's doing anything inappropriate or abusive and wrong. So I want to try to understand how we're looking at that raw data, which again, I think we all agree is interesting and starts, it might be the start of a conversation, but I want to understand how the department's using that data to draw conclusions that might be more useful to me and maybe to others.
Well, I think we're going to have to get clarity then on your question, because I'm not sure that I understand. I hear you about what exists today in the statute, and you're right, there isn't a prohibition other than to determine whether or not someone is no longer a resident of this state, for which I think we would all agree we should in fact be addressing. So if there's something more specific that you're looking for beyond how we are evaluating to ensure that these are residents that are receiving these benefits, at this point we're asking you to now consider a broader restriction regarding out-of-state use. You've heard a number of people raise concerns about the border states. I think that's certainly worthy of further consideration by the committee. At the end of the day, there have been a number of comments made about the program, its intent, where the money should be focused and spent. And we're asking you to consider whether or not this can further help the strengthening these programs.
Well, I guess what I'd say, Commissioners, the data that's been presented so far is interesting, but doesn't lead me to reach any conclusions or to make a determination we need to put additional restrictions into the program. So again, tomorrow I'd love to understand a little bit more about how the department's using that data. Thank you. Sorry.
Senator Hamper. Yes. Thank you. Commissioner, having 3 border towns and commerce goes back and forth like crazy. One of the sentences I underlined from Holly's testimony talking about some states have implemented geographic restriction to that state, to those that border it, which would be very easy for us to do, as in you could certainly restrict it to New Hampshire because, like I said, a couple of my border towns, my goodness, you're lucky if there is a store. But being a nuts and bolts person, how does it work? How do you restrict the use of an EBT card? Let's say we restricted it to no farther than New Hampshire. How does that work from the department level? You turn off a switch electronically? What do you do?
We would be working with our vendor to deal with the actual point of sale, and shutting off the use of the card at those respective vendors. So we would be...
So potentially then if we did, let's say, do the New Hampshire restriction, so that New Hampshire is as far as you go. So I cross Portsmouth and then go down into Massachusetts, and I got my EBT card out and I'm going to make a purchase. I swipe the card, I don't get anywhere. Is that how it would work? Simple as that.
Well, but for the discussion certainly about cash, that is another matter that certainly we need to look at. A number of, it would get back to the data mining, fraud referral, fraud investigations that come our way. It is about a deterrent. It is about education, about the intent of the benefit. So it would be a multifaceted approach. And I heard in response to the comment about the ease, it is not anything to do with technology and how we would negotiate and work with the vendor. We certainly appreciate the level of complexity, but we're confident, given work that has been done in other states, that our vendor is aware of how best to implement these types of changes.
So you can get day out from here.
Well, you might have to go around the barn a few times.
If need be, believe Senator LePage.
Hi, thank you for coming, Commissioner. My question is about fraud. Building on kind of what we're talking about here, just the people using the cards across state lines, and whether they're buying things they shouldn't be buying. I guess I want to know, does the investigative unit, in addition to kind of getting analysis, which is what I think Representative Keating is asking for, rather than just raw data, can we get some information about what kind of fraud cases the unit has figured out, so that way we can address kind of the problems, you know. I want to make sure that whatever we do, whenever we pass, fixes the problems that we've discovered rather than something else.
We can certainly give you data on the types of cases that have been investigated. I would just encourage the committee, though, to think broadly about the principles of these programs and this as a preventive measure as well. We don't want to see further erosion around the integrity of this program. These are common sense measures that we're trying to see in place to help further our mutual goals of ensuring that these resources are spent in support of families and their children.
I want to make sure the money is spent well. I just know that Amazon.com can figure out that I live in Maine and, you know, I like puppies or something like that, you know. But, so, I mean, like, I want to make sure that we do things that address, that ferret out the information that's truly useful in identifying how these programs are not working or how they're harming Maine.
And I wish I had the money that Amazon has to invest in systems. You make a valid point. And we are looking at various ways in which to make sure that the data is being acted on, that it is actionable data that helps to inform policies, that it helps to inform our program integrity and management of our cases.
Yeah, Commissioner, and actually this is a request, and I'll aim it toward Nick. I would like to have the total number of uses of the EBT cards over a one-year period.
The number of transactions.
That's correct, so that we can compare that with the number of incidents that you have reported. That's what that gives me a sense of where it fits into the magnitude. Okay? Thank you. I would like to ask how many more people would like to testify in favor of the bills? Okay, good. Then we can move along and get to the other people. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.